Welcome into Floyd Street's finest. He is Holy Cross head coach, former Louisville assistant Mark Lieberman. I am, as Reese Davis would say, merely Jack Grossman. And this is Floyd Street's finest, part of the Field of 68 podcast network. Like, subscribe, do all of that stuff on YouTube, Spotify, Apple Podcasts, however you're consuming this podcast. We really, really appreciate it. You can find myself on Twitter at Jack Grossman97, coaches at Coach Lieberman. I'm also on Blue Sky at Jack Grossman. Coach, first off-season edition of the pod. It felt like a roller coaster there at the end with Louisville of the season, but so much has changed since the last time we've talked. Namely, Pat Kelsey's absolutely killed it in the portal this past week with Woolley, McNeely, Ryan Conwell. They've really rebuilt and just stacked that backcourt.
Listen, if there's anybody better at it, I don't know. But and even with the transfer from Xavier, like that was so under the radar, and everybody was talking about Woolley and McNeely, and then McNeely absolutely, committed. I guess in the last day or so, but you talk about a scoring punch and replacing it and athleticism and whatnot. You talk about a program that just completely embraces the portal. This is it. And now with all the buzz and the McDonald's game meaning something for people around here, getting to watch Mikael Brown and play well, and then Nate Ament, that's with the conspiracy theory of the graphics being put up there. And I told everybody that's just a glitch. That's just the intern who probably had all the list of schools. So don't read too much into it. But back to what they've done, they've gotten better, if you can believe it.
Yeah, they have. And, you look at it, and we'll start with Conwell because that was the most under the radar one. That's a dude. Here's all you can say. PK stands for Portal King. I mean, you can just go with that there. The way he's been able to work it this past week, but Conwell's a dude that is definitely the biggest surprise of the three. You can say Mikael Brown as well. He's been committed for a while. Just the four new coming backcourt players. That's a guy that obviously Sean Miller goes to Texas. His former coach is there. Texas has a lot of NIL money as well. It's like all these schools do. Louisville has their big punch that's helped them for sure. But to be able to land them over Texas and Sean Miller and over Indiana, who really wanted him as well, that's a lot of gusto from Pat Kelsey to be able to go and get that job done for Ryan Conwell. I mean, obviously, Woolley landing him over Alabama, a Tuscaloosa native as well. That's a huge deal. McNeely went and visited Tennessee, and Rick Barnes. So that's a really, really big deal. So what he's done to land all three of these dudes, very high-profile transfers, has been incredibly impressive.
Yeah, and you're seeing what he's trying to. He just wants to get consistent scoring, athleticism in the backcourt, depth, because that's the key. Look, they ended up playing 7 to 8 guys towards the end of the year, but that wasn't the MO. Without the injuries, to have guys to just run waves at other teams and to get these guys to have it, and it's not just so much in the games. It's the practices are so good. Now you have 9 to 10 guys that just can get after it, and to add that scoring punch and to have those type of guys in the backcourt, I mean, it's amazing. And obviously they're not done yet.
Yeah, they're not. But I mean, like, that's a key thing you say though, because I've gotten the question a couple times over the last day or so after McNeely committed was, how is this going to work? How are you going to get that many guys to play together and to have that not be a problem? And my thought process is, you look at what Pat Kelsey's done in his career. Obviously, he hasn't had this much talent at Charleston and Winthrop, but last season, as you said, playing 7, 8 guys, that was due to all of the injuries. And you look at Louisville's tempo last year, they were 90th in adjusted tempo, 89th in average possession length, which is fine. That's good, but it was almost out of necessity. Well, it wasn't almost. It was absolutely out of necessity that they did that. That was the slowest pace that a Pat Kelsey coach team has played in a decade. And it's not even close. Just looking at his Charleston and Winthrop days, looking at average tempo, again, they were 90th last year. The previous 10 years, they were 51st, 29th, 2nd, 14th, 36th, 16th, 34th, 47th, and 18th. Average possession length, they were Louisville on the offensive end was 16.9 seconds. Again, 89th in the country. That's the only time the previous decade that one of Pat Kelsey's team had an average possession length over 16.2 seconds. And that doesn't sound like a lot, But that's a big difference. That's a jump from being 89th in the country to usually in the top 30, if not the top 10 or 15, is what they usually have been throughout Pat Kelsey's career. So what this does, it lets you get back to that pace that PK really, really wants to play. It lets you play more players. You're not going to see someone play 36, 38 minutes a game like we saw Chucky Hepburn or Terrence Edwards doing out of necessity
Hmm.
this past year. You're going to see guys playing 24, 26 minutes per game, but you're going to be giving so much effort, so much pace, playing with so much tempo within that. The goal is you're going to be wearing other teams out because teams just aren't going to be able to keep up with that. And I think we're really going to see Pat Kelsey be able to unleash that full tempo that really, other than we saw that in the Bahamas, we definitely saw it in the Bahamas last year. We saw it early on, but Tennessee did a great job of slowing that game down. That's what Tennessee does. And then you had the injuries in the Bahamas or Atlantis. You have to separate the Bahamas scrimmages and Atlantis, to be honest. But you had the injuries out in Atlantis to where we never really got to see that at full throttle for Louisville next or last year, to where this upcoming season now, as we turn the page, Pat Kelsey's really wants to get back to that, and the guys he's brought in is going to allow him to be able to play that fast style that he really, really wants to play.
Well, you brought it up. So don't think during these recruiting meetings and these Zoom calls and all these conversations that players aren't asking the same questions. And that happens. That's happened since I was involved in recruiting. Well, where do I fit in? How much playing time? And all those type of things are going to be questions. So as fans are asking that, and Louisville fans are asking, well, how is this all going to work? Those questions are being answered by the coaching staff, and they have a plan. And so they're not just going in there saying, well, we'll figure it out as it goes on. There's a plan in place as they're recruiting a player. They've already done their due diligence, and they've done their homework, and they've understood, hey, you might not play 38 minutes like a Chucky, but you're going to play 28 to 30. You're going to play in this spot and so on. And so all that is to appease the players, but it's also to make them understand that, hey, you're a key cog in what we're doing, but it's going to work out from a playing time standpoint. So it's never something that you're just going in is you raise the question, well, how is this all going to work? They know how it's going to work. The players will understand. The guys that are getting recruited will get those answers because that's paramount to whether they're coming to school here or not.
It is. How much tougher? Because I know that that's everyone's one of the cliches that people throw out these days is, well, you're trying to patch together this team. You only get a couple weeks to try to learn a kid instead of multiple years. And yes, it is tougher. It is a much quicker process. It is also a little naive because even though the transfer portal doesn't open until the second week of the NCAA tournament, stuff's going on behind the scenes that we don't really know about. But how much tougher is that for a coaching staff to be able to vet everything, do the due diligence, and make sure they're getting the right kids to fit the systems that they want?
It's an art, not a science. So you're never going to know for sure, but you're going to do everything you can. When I'm recruiting a kid, I go back to people I know in his high school days or his high school coach or his travel coaches or other people have coached him. And honestly, in this business, that's why you have such a fraternity. That's why you have relationships. I'll call coaches and say, look, what's the deal? Yeah, he can be this at times, but he wants to compete. And you're never going to get a perfect look. No one's ever going to be a complete milk drinker and it's yes sir, no sir. That's just not the way it is. You just want guys who are competitive, who understand they want to get better, and they're coachable. And if you can work around, there's going to be guys who don't always give you the answer you want, especially in this day and age, Jack. You know, these aren't 18-year-old kids anymore that you can really kind of mold, and they're bright-eyed and bushy-tailed. These guys have been through it. But you look at everything. Was there a suspension? Was there an issue with a coach? Was there an issue with a player? You're going to ask those hard questions. And some teams don't. Some teams will just, hey, look, I'm going to get lured in by the talent. And you see that. Look, Todd Golden at the end of his after the game, and they're all surrounding him. What are you looking for? We're looking for guys who want to be here, guys that want to work, guys who want to live in the gym. And that's a question I've always asked in recruiting, and that's what everybody's asking. You know, are you a gym rat? How much time do you spend in there? And you can find that out. You can ask managers. You can ask everybody. Hey, you know, how hard does this kid want to just be as competitive as possible and be a winner? But sometimes, Jack, it's going to happen. You get a guy, and those things change, and you see that it does happen, and you do your best to navigate it because you vet it as best you can, but it's never going to be perfect.
And we've seen this will be the challenge for Pat Kelsey. Obviously, we've seen the hit or miss on the big portal classes with bringing all that talent together. Obviously, it's a good problem to have. You want to be able to navigate the fact that Pat Kelsey was able to navigate bringing in an entire new team last year to be very successful. Gives you a lot of confidence in that. But that'll be the big thing to watch: is how do you handle all the different personalities and all that stuff. And again, that's the problem you sign up for. That is a good problem to have in these days of college basketball. But let's do this. We'll kind of go player by player here, kind of talk about what Louisville's getting. We'll start with Isaac McNeely because that to me is the easiest one. I think you're just going to plug him into the Rain Smith role and say we are going to get you a bunch of threes. Except I think the biggest difference is over 42% from three last year, over 44.5% from three 2 years ago. So very proven on in the ACC, being able a fully capable shooter. He's a bit bigger than Rain, which is
Hmm.
helpful, and he's a bit more athletic. And again, not to knock Rain, that it was just kind of tough sometimes to watch him on the defensive end. To be completely honest, I think McNeely's better suited on the defensive end of the floor than Rain is as well. May not be as pure of a shooter, but that no one's as pure of a shooter as Rain Smith in college basketball. You don't find that as much. But again, 42.3% last year, over 44.5% the year before. Elite from behind the arc. And I think he's going to have a field day with what Pat Kelsey can draw up for him to get him open, and the fact that there's going to be so many other ball handlers and shot makers and shot creators. It's going to be a really perfect fit, I feel, for Louisville.
Oh yeah, look, and I think Rain Smith, we talked about this as the year went on, he got better. He
Yeah.
understood the game, and he understood the system, and understood that he can be connected to other guys defensively. And you saw the effort. But with a guy like McNeely, I mean, you're talking about a guy that's been a very good defensive player, but with his size and so on, and you said it yourself, you're bringing in other guys that can just it's spreading the floor and offensive spacing, and spacing is offense when you have these other guys that can knock down shots. I mean, Cornwell's a heck of a shooter. I mean, I looked at numbers of him, and it was almost a guy who had a certain number of 3-point shots, a percentage in 2-point shots. And I think statistically, the only guy that, and I'm kind of butchering the number system here, but I think it was him and Walter Clayton the third, who basically had the same type of numbers in Division One, and that was
I'll
it.
give you one. Ryan Conwell had a true shooting percentage of 61% this past season. That's third. That was third in the Big East behind Zuby Ejiofor and Ryan Kalkbrenner. That's pretty damn good, especially when you're thinking about how the two guys ahead of him are big guys, and he's a guard on their perimeter. He's able to shoot the ball that well.
Yeah, that's phenomenal. And the style of play. Look, I'm a huge fan of Terrence Edwards, but it was more of a Kyle Anderson, slow it down, kind of back you in, and create guys of movement off of that. But now you have guys that can really just blow by and get really into gaps and get paint touches and kick out, where it's playing a little with a little more pace. And the beauty of that as well is when you have guys that are coming in, and we're talking about McNeely, but when you have guys that are returning as well, when you have the Roos and the James Scotts and those guys, and Hadley, look, those guys understand what they're supposed to do offensively, where they're supposed to be. Those guys are as good as coaches as anybody. So that's going to be helpful as well. But bringing in a kid like McNeely, who can just absolutely, you can't help off. But now you have the other pieces. They're gonna be a lot more dangerous on offense.
Yeah, that's one of the things I really love about Conwell too, because you look at where he's been the last 2 years at Xavier and at Indiana State. He's a guy that, yes, he can go out, create his own shot. He's really good in pick and roll. He's really good finishing around the rim, but he's also a dude that can play off the ball, spot up, shoot. You think about Xavier and all the guards they had I think he was the best guard on the team this past year. But Davion McKnight can run offense, create his own shot. Swain is a guy that you can run offense through. Obviously, Zach Fremantle, when he was healthy, is a guy in the post you can run things through. You think about what he had 2 years ago at Indiana State, how much offense they ran through Robbie Avila and Josh Schertz and that team. Conwell's a guy that doesn't need the ball in his hands to be great. He's a dude that can get his shots, get his points in so many different ways. That's something that's going to be really helpful when you have a Michael Brown, a stud freshman, coming in to say, okay, these are dudes that can create their own shot, but they don't need to have the ball in their hands all the time. That's going to be really beneficial to where you look at it and you're watching Louisville next year. You're going to have any three of McNeely, Conwell, Woolley, and Brown on the court at the same time. Three of those four guys most of the time. And then you can throw in a Hadley or Case and Pryor, assuming both of them come back. And then James Scott or Ali Khalifa, who I feel like Khalifa's been forgotten about in all of this. And I'm super excited to watch Ali Khalifa next year. To where, especially, let's say you have a lineup of the three guards, Pryor and Khalifa. Those are five guys that, in one way or another, can create their own shot, whether it be the three guards being able to beat guys off the dribble or in pick and roll, Khalifa initiating offense from basically playing a point center role. If you watch like what Mark Pope did with Amari Williams this past year, Ali Khalifa was an even better version. I think a better way of putting it, he didn't have the peaks and valleys of Amari Williams, but he was a much more consistent presence at BYU 2 years ago, I think is the best way of putting it. You knew what you were getting from him every night.
Yep.
Right. To where I think you can run so much through him at the high post, at the top of the key, that will be really, really beneficial. And Case and Pryor, a dude that before he got hurt last year was Louisville's really big primary ways to initiate offense. Him and Chucky Hepburn. Where do you think about what Pryor did in Atlantis before he got hurt? And you look at it and say, okay, you got five guys that can all break you down one on one off the dribble, five guys that can all shoot the ball to varying degrees, and five guys that can score on or off the ball. That even getting in before all the actions and all the ball movement, all the player movement, and the pace that they're going to play with that Pat Kelsey loves, you can just picture five guys, five out, going, okay, you have the ball in the guards' hands. They can beat anyone one on one and put the defense in an incredibly difficult position of do you give up the layup or do you get in rotation and probably give up a wide open three? It's going to be a very, very tough thing for teams to defend next year. And honestly, at times when they're hitting shots, it's going to be virtually impossible to defend this team.
And you mentioned Conwell, like he's so athletic too. He's just a guy that can just put his head down, straight line drive, and get somewhere. So that's something that besides, and really, you had Chucky, but you didn't really have a lot of guys that were just okay, just get out of his way, or he's just coming downhill. And then when you mentioned Khalifa, but even like with James Scott, these guys understand who Khalifa's a better facilitator and so on. But James Scott's only going to get better at the things he does. But he's so good in DHOs. He's
Yeah.
so good in those type of actions, in the zooms and whatnot. So it's just pick your poison when you have some of these guys. If you put Conwell and McNeely on the same side, and are you gonna and they're in a zoom, and you're gonna worry about, well, McNeely's lifting up. Do I stay? Do I stay attached? And do I not? And then if you leave James Scott, he's just such a great finisher around the basket, which Chucky made him look good. Imagine what this group's going to do with him as well.
Yeah, I think that's the big difference between this past year, what we're seeing come together next year, because it really was, other than Edwards in that old man game, Hadley could do some, especially in that post up in the short corner that they like to go to. But it really was after Corin Johnson especially got hurt. It was okay. Chucky's has to be the guy all the time here. And he was phenomenal at that. I'm not knocking Chucky Hepburn. He was an All-American for a reason. He was spectacular. But to be able to have different options and more versatility within those options, I think is going to be incredibly beneficial for Pat Kelsey, instead of putting so much pressure just on one guy to run so much stuff for you.
Yeah, well, and then the amount of from a defensive impact that Chucky had, don't think it didn't take its toll on him. And he's not taking plays off, but just to battle and dodge and defeat as many screens as he had to do, and then offensively to be the guy to count on. And now you have such more balance. Not that they were good last year, but you're going from that to just so much more athleticism, so much more of a scoring punch this year. It's going to make a difference.
Yeah, and you brought up James Scott too. The development of him and Connie Roos is going to be so pivotal, and something that's really going to be fascinating to watch, because James Scott came a very long way this past season. We've talked about it a lot, about how he was able to stay out of foul trouble, get on the court more. And once he was able to play 25, 30 minutes a game, that to me is really when Louisville season took off a year ago, is when he was able to have that presence consistently without having the foul issues of being a rim protector, really good on the defensive end, but also, as you said, in the dribble handoffs and the zoom actions, the finishing around the rim. If he can just keep developing on the track that he's been on, that combination of him and Khalifa is going to be two guys that can do do some similar stuff with facilitating, but give you two very, very different looks on both ends of the floor that really allows you to play matchups and be able to play both those guys, give defenses different looks, keep the opposition from getting comfortable to where I don't really think Louisville has to go out and add big pieces in the front court. Obviously, Amet would be a very big cherry on top to everything that Louisville's gotten, but I think Louisville's in a good spot, assuming they get Pryor and Hadley back in that front court to where you can rely on the development from within, the continuality from Scott and Roos. You get Pryor back. Ali Khalifa, I think, is going to be a really, really good player in the ACC next year who has power conference experience in the Big 12 to where I think you got guys that have really good fits. I don't think you have to go out and spend a lot more money on another big guy. I mean, obviously, again, Amet is the cherry on top. You take him if you can get him. It's not a bad thing by any means, but I think Louisville's in a good place in the front court.
Yeah, I'm a big fan of Ruth's. I think he's just the jump he's going to make
Just
and
scratching
watching
that
him.
potential.
Oh,
Yeah.
goodness gracious. I mean, the guy can shoot it. He's got length. He's got athleticism. What you're going to see and Coach Kelsey is a guy who's a player development guy as well. And you want better players, not better plays. The way the guy's going to come in next year, I think people should be just really excited about where he's going to be at. I think he's going to be special, especially when you have the guards that are going to be around him. So the attention that for him to be able to run the floor and to be impactful in different ways, yeah, I think he's going to be special.
Yeah, I'd say Adrian Woolley's kind of the fourth guy that we haven't talked about much here. Obviously, Conference USA Player of the Year, another guy that can get to the rim, really good shooter as well. The fit there, again, like the other guys, seems really, really damn good for Pat Kelsey and his staff for what they want there.
He was certainly a guy that was on the radar for them at Charleston. So that's a guy that they had recruited and knew well. And then to see his development and to see what he can do, and then to say, because look, it's amazing now with the portal and recruit. Because when you're recruiting, Jack, you're like, is he good enough? Do you think you're just not sure? And because the first question every recruiter used to ask when you're talking about a player. So when I was a high school coach, and I would get a question about a good player. Who else is recruiting him? So that was the question you'd always get because people just did not trust their eyes. If you said, all right, this kid's getting recruited by Duke, Carolina, and Kentucky, well, then you know he's good enough. But if you mention a Kennesaw State, and if you mention a Charleston, and you mention an Illinois State, then they're like, is he good enough to play at our level? Do you think, is he going to make it? But then you see him now, and that's the beauty now of college basketball. You see that this kid, you know what? He's a stud, and he could play at any level. So now there's no qualms about if you could pull the trigger. So a kid like him, who I always thought was just really crafty and can get where he wants and is very efficient, is a really good player. So he's going to be a good fit. But then you have the guys like Tom Long, you have Mikael Brown, so you have some more of the athleticism as well that he also has, but it's just you have so many good players on the floor. So now that they know, and it's not that Coach Kelsey couldn't pull a trigger here at Louisville, but now that you know he's good enough, now he's a good fit.
Yeah, that to me is kind of honestly what made me think of because I remember back, especially in the radio days, but I still do it from this time. Where you're looking at players, you're looking at recruits, instead of asking the coach that, you're just kind of looking on like the 247 page of,
Yeah.
okay, yeah, who else has offered this kid? Who are you getting this kid over? And that honestly sometimes matters just as much as the rankings as when you're evaluating a player. Well, I say evaluating when you're looking at a player profile, let's be honest here when it comes to recruiting. But I think that's what makes because there are some coaches like I think about Matt Painter, for instance, and what he's done at Purdue to where he gets guys like, Braden Smith, for instance, who didn't have D1 big time D1 offers other than Purdue, or a guy like Zach Edey, or even guys like Carson Edwards. What's made him so good is that he's taken a lot of these guys that were under recruited, undervalued, and trusted his gut and said, no, everyone else is wrong. I can see it with my eyes here. This is a really damn good player. And he's had a lot of success with that. So I don't know why it made me think of that when you said that, but because a lot of coaches do just do the thing that you're talking about of, well, he's being recruited by Duke and Kentucky. He must be pretty damn good. But for a guy like Pater to do that, I think Pat Kelsey for, Obviously had to do that at Charleston, trying to get guys and bringing the Charleston guys that he brought over is a little bit of that as well. Can they do that in the ACC? But we've seen them be able to do that last year, and now once you hit on that, you can take it to a whole other level with guys like Brown, like guys like Conwell, to where a dude like Woolley, who's in the Conference USA, but we have seen him. I remember I went to the game that they played against Rutgers up here in Kennesaw. They ended up beating Rutgers. That was kind of before we found out that Rutgers wasn't a very good basketball team, but they still had Ace Bailey, Dylan Harper, backcourt players that Woolley had to deal with, and I never really felt like that he was overwhelmingly just in
Yeah.
shock about the athleticism. He obviously Bailey, Harper, better players are going to be top 5 picks in the NBA draft, but Woolley was a dude that could stand his ground on that point. Didn't have an incredibly flashy stat line in that game, but you never felt like he was athletically overwhelmed by facing those two guys. And you're not going to face many people in even in the ACC or whatever the non-conference schedule looks like next year that are as athletic as those two dudes because they're really damn good basketball
Yeah,
players.
and sometimes in travel basketball, so like a Woolley, he's playing with good players on his travel team, but he's not playing on one of the elite big time programs where now you're playing against one of those teams that have 5 Cooper flags out there in travel basketball, and it could make the kid look like he's not as good as he can be because he's trying to do too much. So there's so much that goes into it. And now with the portal that you get to say, okay, we basically get to assess a guy after a year. Look, Walter Clayton was a guy that wasn't overly recruited. It was a guy, Casey Stanley, who was a former assistant at St. John's, was just gung-ho for and had to really convince Coach Pitino, hey, this guy is good enough to play for us. And they get him in Iona, and the rest is history. And there's so many of those type of stories out there of guys that, well, sometimes it's hard for coaches to pull a trigger because is he good enough? You're always going to have that question. You're always every single coach, is he good enough? Yeah, there's the outliers, Cooper Flag and so on. Guess what? He's good enough. But there's going to be some that you're just like, how can he play at this level? We went through it with Russ Smith. Is he good enough? All he had was Manhattan, was the only other offer he had. So this is part of it. And so many coaches don't trust their eyes. And now it's become easier for the high majors because you know what? We've got a G League season, which is basically low to mid-major basketball. And you get to watch him and see, you know what? Yeah, he is good enough. Let's go get him.
Well, when did you guys fully trust that, okay, Russ Smith is good enough here?
I will tell you I thought his freshman year in pickup games, there was nobody like him. He had that New York game to him, and no one could stop him. Then he had his injuries, and we still weren't sure. But when we went to the Bahamas, it seems to be a Bahamas theme this year,
Yeah.
or on our shows. But we went down there, and he just looked healthy. He could get wherever he wants, and he had the confidence after that. Because look, if you don't have confidence as a player, and that first year was really tough for him. But that second year, the confidence he had, realizing, you know what, and Coach Pitino, to his credit, letting Russ do what he does well, manipulate high ball screens, attack downhill, basically not try and conform to what we were doing, but let him be the player he was. That's when we were able to figure it out.
Yeah, it boomed. to be to
I
be
would say
simple
it
there.
did.
Yeah, I'd say it worked pretty well there. Let me ask you this, because, we're gonna get to the Final Four stuff here, but one last thing is we've talked a lot about the offensive end with all this stuff, and that's the glitz and the glamour of all this. How do you see all these pieces working together defensively on that end of the floor?
Oh, I think that's one thing that's what Coach Kelsey teaches and preaches. They're very meticulous with their details and how they defend, and watching their practices, watching their games. I don't think that's a way of fitting it. And then again, that's a part of it. You don't think they're asking those questions as we sit here and they get players and guys who are you really want to get, Jack, in recruiting. You really want to get guys who offensively can get things done, can create their own shots, can get somewhere in 3 dribbles and less, unless you're Terrence Edwards and play
The old man YMCA game.
over 40, but he's efficient in what he does. So those are all things you look for. Can he shoot it? All those type of things. And then getting him to defend, that's the coach's job. But you're asking those questions. You're seeing him. You're watching copious amounts of film of him individually, collectively, how he is off the ball, how he is on the ball. But it's paramount you get guys that can play and score. And then your job is to coach them up and coach the heck out of them to defend as the style that you want.
Yeah, and I think they're going to be able to do that with all that athleticism, all the versatility they're going to have on that end of the floor as well. Going to be a really, really fun offseason leading up to November, which is unfortunately a very long way away for a season that's going to have expectations for Louisville that we have not seen probably since the 2019-20 season where they started out preseason number one. I don't know. I don't think they'll be that high. Maybe they get data that, but I definitely am thinking, okay, this is going to be a team that probably has the best backcourt in America on paper right now, and can very well be in that top 10-ish range going in to
Oh
next season.
yeah,
Yeah,
I
but
agree.
but we have the next 7 months to keep breaking this down. We're going to do that ad nauseum here on Floyd Street's Finest, but we do have a Final Four coming up in about 24 hours or so after, or 25, 26, something like that. Final Four's tomorrow. And it is the most loaded Final Four of my lifetime, Coach. I would argue it's probably of both of our lifetimes. All 4 1 seeds. And not just that, just how dominant, obviously, it's the second time that's ever happened, but how dominant these 4 teams have been all year. It's clearly been the best 4 teams. And we're going to start here with Duke and Houston because I'm fascinated by both matchups, to be honest, but especially this Duke Houston game because you look at the Elite Eight, and I don't know if I've ever seen 2 teams in a
Mm-hmm.
1v2 matchup in terms of the seeding be so dominant and be able to just control games like that, the way Duke did against Alabama, holding them to 65 points, and what Houston did, just absolutely suffocating a really, really good Tennessee team.
Look, I think Duke is the most connected. To have young players that they do, and with Cooper and with Knable, with all the other guys they have, and I don't want to butcher the big kid for Duke. I'll let you say it first, and then I'll
It's either Malach or Malawach.
yeah, I
I've
say
heard both.
Malawach.
Yeah,
I've said
yeah.
Malawach, and I just didn't want you to
He's
have to
really,
correct.
really damn good. That's all we need to know.
You talk about and just the way he moves and not just everybody talks about the rim protection and what he does, but watch him on the perimeter too. They've used switches on him and he's been able to contain guards, him in ball screens. He's never late and lazy. His activity and God bless everybody's crediting all these coaches and deservedly so. But what John Shire's done with that group and to watch them defend and how they defended Alabama too, and just it was relentless and not giving up second shots and just technique wise and knowing that Alabama is going to shoot so many long shots. You watch them; they're making contact on the shooters. They're stepping back and stepping in on those 3-point shots. They're not giving up a bunch of seconds. But I just for a young team to have 3 freshmen like that, and look, they've got James and they've got some other pieces and Proctor and so on that are long and athletic. But for that team to be that good defensively, as young as they are, when you know what you're going to get with Houston, and just my gosh, it just I'm just so excited to watch those games, Jack. I'm tongue tied right now because I just think that's, to me, it's just, I do think Houston has a bit of advantage just because of their physicality and the way they contest everything. Duke just hasn't seen, Jack. They just haven't seen. Look, they played some really good teams. They played Auburn and they played through the tournament, and you've seen that. And you've played in Arkansas, in Alabama.
Yeah,
But
yeah, Alabama doesn't defend like Houston.
it's the understatement of the year. When you talk about a team that contests everything, contests your cuts, they bump every cutter, and they're in a military press stance where they're using their chests and not their hands. And they're so low. If you watch them, just they catch every move. You're not getting by them on the bounce. And the way they're going to double Cooper Flag, but they're used to doing that. If they're going to put Cooper around the mid post area, so yeah, this is I'm get your, as Terrell Owens says, get your popcorn ready because it's going to be a great one.
Yeah, I think you look at Duke, and the biggest thing was again just how they were able to rotate with defensively against Alabama, the way Alabama moves the ball, the way they're able to whip it around, get the paint touches and spray it out. Duke was able to stick with them. Can they do that again against Houston? That's a very tough thing because you look at that Houston Tennessee game when Tennessee kind of tried to get back into it. They extended their defense. They went full court when they were one pressing and trapping out of that, or two because Tennessee could not guard Jawan Roberts
Mm-hmm.
on the block, which wasn't a scouting thing. You look at there were two plays in that game that I'm just like, that's just you can't do anything about it because everyone knows Jawan Roberts wants to get to his left hand.
Right.
That's where he's always trying to get to. That's what he wants to get to. That's where he will finish 98% of the time. There was a play early on in the game before he picked up that second foul. And for Houston to do what they did, the Jawan Roberts having two fouls and sitting out the last 14 and a half minutes that first, that makes it even more insane that they're able to just suffocate Tennessee the way they did. But before that happened, he had a play where Felix Akpara, and this goes to how well Rick Barnes on a quick 2-day scout was able to get that scouting report instilled in his team. He's shading the right shoulder. He's doing everything he can to take away from it. He's pushed Roberts out from his comfort zone. He's about 10, 12 feet out instead of like 4 or 5 feet. And he still is able to finish over contact for an and one, bank it off the glass with his left hand. I'm like, what are you supposed to do on that? And then you looked in the second half, there was a play where same thing's going on, and Roberts, for rarity. Again, if a kid does this, you just say, okay, you just give him a salute and move on. Because again, you're Akpara, who is one of the best interior defenders in the country. Don't get me wrong. He's 7 foot plus wingspan, extremely long, athletic, talented shot blocker. Roberts is able to hit him with a counter, finish with his right hand on an and one. It's like, you're not defending that to where
Yeah,
eventually.
he drop stepped to his left and just
Yeah.
basically threw it up with his right hand, and it goes in. And yeah, and that's what you worry about because look, with Duke, with their depth, if he gets in foul trouble,
Yeah.
then that's the issue. Who you're going to have physically that's going to be able to match up with what they do, because it used to be where Houston's best offense was a missed shot because there's just going to be offensive rebounds.
And it still is a great offense for him.
It's a fantastic offense for him, but the way Sharp was shooting. And look, I don't think Uzan played a really good game, but he's still a floor general. He's going to make the right plays to guys. But then when you have a guy like LJ Cryer who can just at any time, he's just going to be able to create his own shot. And they have three guards that can space you out and so on. And when bodies come off bodies, if they help up, those guys, the bigs for Houston, are just monsters. They're going to finish.
Yeah, guys with 7'2" and 7'6" wingspans down low for Houston as well. The glass is going to be a big storyline in this game. But the thing I took a very long rant of getting to is whether Tennessee was pressuring and doubling, tending to the ball, or they were forced to double Jawan Roberts. So they couldn't double him one-on-one. Houston did such a good job of moving the ball, finding the open guy, and whether it be Sharp or Cryer, Sharp had 4 threes in that second half, was huge in that game, of being able to pass the ball out of those double teams and beat a Tennessee team that, like Duke, is incredibly elite on the defensive end, get them in rotation and stay ahead of the rotation. The question is, what takes over here? Which side of that wins? Is it Duke who was able to take that away from Alabama, or Houston who was able to get out ahead of Tennessee? Two teams, Alabama and Tennessee, who are at the very top of the sport of two of those things. Which one can replicate itself when Houston has the ball, I think is fascinating to me.
See, I don't think it's unique for Houston. You watch them. That's the MO.
I mean, that's what they've done all year. Yes.
Yeah, exactly. They move the ball so well. They trust it, and they understand, you know what? If the ball's in LJ's hands, he's going to create, and we understand that. So sometimes when you're a good offensive team, you know where the shot's coming from, why they're one of the best offensive rebounding teams ever. But when you know LJ Cryer can get a shot off, you're not thinking, okay, I got to move here. I know I can go to the boards and get a shot or get an offensive rebound. So they do that so well. And this is the part where you have takes and that kind of stuff. I really love what Shire's done with Duke. I think they're phenomenal. They're connected. I think they're the most connected team from that standpoint. But I think Houston's a different entity, and I think Houston is just physically going to be able to, because you have the scoring punch, you have the guard play. This is the best team he's probably had, and I just think this team is good enough to get past Duke.
So you're sticking with Houston on this?
I am.
I love it. I love it. I've kind of found myself fighting against the narrative that Duke, like you can just hand Duke the title and there's no chance anyone can beat them. That I kind of feel like the groundswell after this past weekend is kind of what we've seen to where, again, I think Duke's the best team. I'm picking Duke to win, but Houston is so damn good. Florida and Auburn are so good. You can't, this isn't a situation where even last year, as good as Purdue was, we knew that UConn was just a step above everyone, and it wasn't close. I don't think it's the same thing right now, and that's not to knock Duke. That's a credit to how dominant these other three teams in the Final Four have been also this year. So really, I think LJ Cryer could get to that step back whenever he wants, no matter who he's playing.
Mm-hmm.
And he's going to be a huge key. He can't have a game like he did against Purdue in the Sweet 16 where he was 1 of 11 or whatever it was. But hopefully that's just the one off game out of the system. You flush it, you move on. He was really, really good against Tennessee to where you can say, okay, that's the survive and advance game that every team's going to have throughout a tournament. But I look at it as Houston's so physical, as you said, they can. It's not crazy to say they could beat Duke, Florida, and their guards, and I think they have such a complete roster. It's not crazy they could beat Duke. Auburn has Jedi Broom, has all those players. They get the guards rolling as well. It's not crazy to say they could beat Duke either. So you have since 1999 when Ken Palm started, you've only had 6 teams before this season have a net rating of 35 or above. All 6 teams in
Right.
25 years. I know this isn't the first time I said this, but I think it's prevalent to repeat here. Duke, Houston, Florida, and Auburn are all have a net rating above 35. We've never seen a year like this in college basketball. You've had 4 historically dominant teams, and every year one of those teams has made the Final Four. Those other 6 teams, so it probably shouldn't be that shocking that all 4 of these teams were able to get to San Antonio. To where I'm still picking Duke because I love the positional size. I think they're more talented, and I think they're able to. I don't know if they'll be fully able to handle the physicality for a full 40 minutes, but I think they're going to be able to match it enough to where I'm at. I'm honestly, the more people have talked to Duke, the more I've kind of pivoted towards maybe we're going to see Houston. I've been trying to find ways more that Houston's going to win and maybe overcomplicating things a little bit. But I think the 2 biggest things, you mentioned the connectivity. Defensively, what Malach has taken them to a whole other level, the way he's developed this year. And then on the offensive end, I really think what changed things was Tyrese Proctor, a dude that has had an up and down career to say the least, that they've moved off the ball a lot this year, and he's really relished that role to become really a pure 3-and-D guy, a guy that's given them that consistent outside punch to where he's been absolutely dead-eye in this tournament. He's been phenomenal shooting the ball. He's given them that perimeter look to where, yes, he's not always handling the ball anymore, but to give him that consistent threat from the outside in addition to Knipple. Plus, he's been a lights-out defender as well on the other end of the floor. I think he's the dude that really unlocked this additional level for Duke that we've seen the last couple months.
I think you could sit here and we could go on for hours and discuss why Houston can win and why Duke can win. And that's the beauty of this. And you said it, like the last year, people could whistle past the graveyard, but Connecticut was not losing the last couple of years. Yeah. They were just that good. They just overwhelmed everybody. Where you watch these games, and I really believe that, you could sway me to believe, Duke's going to win. I just seeing that Houston, I'm just going to give the edge with the experience and the age, and I think it makes a difference. I think as talented as those young guys are, and sometimes you would used to go by the fact that who has more pros on the floor, and certainly Duke has more pros on the floor.
Yeah.
But I think at this time right now, because the physicality and the age gap with Houston, I just give them a slight edge.
How much, if the game, because Duke hasn't, I mean, Alabama put a little bit of game pressure on them. They got within, I think, 7 at one point. Then Duke had the KO 13-0 run. Arizona got within 6, but it was so late in the game to where it wasn't really a lot of game pressure. I want to know what happens with Duke because we haven't seen them a lot in a late game, 1-possession game. You need to get a bucket to win. I mean, we saw North Carolina where they escaped in the ACC tournament because of the lane violation. We saw them. They lost to Clemson earlier. That's the only loss they've had since December. I know I'm getting incredibly nitpicky right now, but then we saw back in November the Kentucky and Kansas games them struggle a little bit. How much would you worry about that on a Duke side if you're in a close game? Of course, you could say, well, they've been so dominant, maybe they just won't be in a close game, kind of like Connecticut last year. But if it's a 2 3 point game, couple minutes left, I feel like that's where Houston could rely on the experience, the age, all that stuff. But can Houston get to that point? I think is the other big question.
You go back to, and I'm just going to say Mal because I just don't want to butcher his name for the podcast. But if Duke's big, if Mal gets in foul trouble, and you saw that a little bit against North Carolina and so on, like if he's not on the floor, if he's not playing 30, 35 minutes, then you're going to have an issue because he just does so many things. Because we talked earlier that his foot speed and the ability to erase mistakes and give multiple efforts and guard and even to switch late clock if you have to on ball screens and certain things, and they've done it not even late clock. So I just think if he's not on the floor for a lot of minutes, if you think Houston's not trying to target him and attack him and pump fake and get him in trouble, and Roberts just burying into him, and whether it's going to be a call either way. So yeah, I don't think they're susceptible. I wouldn't say, okay, well, here's nitpicking and here's a weakness of Duke and so on. I think they're, like I said, I think they're the most connected team. And if they win it all, I'm not shocked. I'm not shocked in the least. I just think Houston is going to figure out a way with their experience and their strength and their backcourt that I'm just going to roll with LJ Cryer to make a big shot in that game where you're going to see something like 62-61. I don't think it's going to be a very high scoring game. I think it's going to be one of those things where Houston's going to get them to play at their pace, but I think Duke can be fine playing at that pace.
I think Duke likes to play that pace. I mean,
no doubt.
I mean, they prefer to play that pace.
Yeah, that's the stamp that Shire's put on. Whenever you're watching a team, Jack, you're saying, okay, does this team represent the coach's identity? And I think John Shire has carved this team out into his identity. They're taking good shots. They defend the shit out of you. And they're just a team that just understands who they are, and they're not forcing it. And if they do, you never see them. That team, you talk about a team that gets back in transition and understands that, and their first 3 steps. I love watching them play from that standpoint. So if we said if we're talking on Monday or Tuesday, and it's like, all right, well, Duke won it all, not surprised.
Right.
I just think Houston is going to somehow figure out a way.
One last thing I want to ask you about before we move to Florida and Auburn. LJ Cryer, I think, is such a huge key on both ends of the floor. We talked about how he had to knock down shots. You look at the other end, and this is something that on the national shows, Rob Doster has talked about ad nauseum all week, about how Duke was able to manipulate Alabama defensively, get Mark Sears caught in switches or off of dribble handoffs, to where in that second half, and he's right about this, they just went after Sears over and over and over and over again when Duke had the ball. And you look at LJ Cryer, a dude who, you have to give the caveat, he is a much, much better defender than Mark Sears is, but still that kind of same profile of undersized guard, only 6'1". But to me, I view it as the book's been out on that. And Calvin Sampson's had 6 days to try to figure out a way to counteract that. And whether it's by blitzing ball screens, trying to double more of that, I think that's going to be the answer. But what does Calvin Sampson do to try to avoid getting LJ Cryer caught in a switch on a Knippel or a Cooper Flag to where they're trying to defend one-on-one?
Well, you watch Houston's style, and they're not a team that's going to switch out of convenience.
Right.
They'll switch out of necessity, but they're not a team that's just going to basically switch. And they just do a great job of recovering. And you talk about a team that identifies. If they had a situation where all of a sudden you have it, because look, you're going to have cross matches in a basketball game. Houston probably has the least amount, and I'm sure you could pull up a statistic that will show that. But if they have that situation, they're not afraid to fire or double down on somebody to take the ball out of his hands and then recover back, because good things happen when the ball's in flight with Houston. They're moving, they're scrambling. So I don't think there's going to be the same type of situation. And when you talk about LJ Cryer, and it's not a knock on Sears because I'm a fan of Sears,
right?
But LJ Cryer to me is a better player. And plus, he has the freedom to understand he's a great mid-range shooter, which of course Mark Sears was, but really can't get into that kind of mode and so on. Well, LJ Cryer can get and snake and get into the mid-range and then take a body off. And when you're coming off to contest, those Houston guys are smelling blood in the water. They're like sharks. So if there's a guy coming off, there's their chance to just sprint to that rim and put it back. So that's where Houston, to me, just has that advantage, because they're not going to be compromised like Alabama was, because Alabama, as good as they are, there's certain things that you can put them in a and to compromise them from both offensively and defensively. Where I'm watching Houston, and really, it's almost like at the end they were kind of playing with their food with Gonzaga when they had
Yeah.
a 14-point lead. And you look at them, how they manhandled Tennessee, how they manhandled everybody else. Again, this is I'm giggling here. I'm in a good way. I'm so giddy because I just can't wait for Saturday, because I just can't wait to see. And as a coach, believe me, from the moment the game starts, I'm watching every little intricacy of what teams are doing. But Houston is who they are, and you could prepare for that. But the physicality of what they're going to do, the first time Cooper Flagg tries to back a guy down, and he realizes he's going into the Incredible Hulk, and there's guys swiping and digging at him, it's a different animal, Jack.
It's going to be a clash of titans, man. I mean, Florida Auburn's going to be awesome as well, but that shows how good this Final Four is, that we're getting Florida Auburn, and it's just kind of the undercard for what Duke and Houston is. And Florida and Auburn can absolutely win the national championship too. Don't get
no
me wrong,
doubt,
but
no doubt.
But just
I have Florida winning it all.
Yeah, yeah, I do too in my bracket. I'm debating being a coward and changing that to Duke, but I do before the tournament started. I had Florida winning it all, and if Florida does win it all, it might be because Walter Clayton has just completes his Kemba Walker type run.
Well,
You look at
that
Florida that Florida Texas Tech game, man. People talk about I'm a little disappointed that like Texas Tech choking has kind of been how that's built. And yes, they missed free throws and they made mistakes. But for Florida to win that game, you still had 4 straight possessions where Hauk gets an offensive rebound, throws a ball out, then darts out to the wing and hits a three. Then Clayton pulls up and hits 2 threes, and then Clayton has the play where he's in the lane, just dribbles out of the lane, shoots a fadeaway from the top of the key. Who the hell does that? I mean, they had to hit 4 incredibly difficult 3-point shots in a row to complete that comeback and win that game, to where, yeah, again, Texas Tech made some mistakes, but to me, that was all about just an incredible shot making ability from both Thomas Hauk, Walter Clayton, and that Florida team, to where that is just, you talk about just moments there that you're like, okay, that's a national championship winning team. It's stuff like that where you're like, okay, this might be a team of destiny here.
Yeah, Walter Clayton right now, there's not a thing. I think even right after the game, I don't know if it was Hauk, just says, this is a cold man, like right in the post-game interview. Like, the guy is what he did against Connecticut.
Yep, the shot he hit against UConn too. Yep.
You mentioned Kemba Walker, and I was there firsthand, unfortunately, to see that in the Big East tournament. But I just think he is the confidence that young man plays with. And one of my biggest things is if you can always draw 2 defenders, and if you can get where you want, no matter how you're guarded, that's him. He's as good as it gets. And so I'm taking, to me, he's the best guard in the tournament. And it's not just, now you have Elijah Martin around him, you have Richard, you have Condon, you have Hauk. I mean, those guys are phenomenal.
Hauk was spectacular in that Texas Tech game.
And I don't think people realize how big he is. He is just he is long, he shoots it, he rebounds. He's a tough kid. I think he's a stud as well. So to me, and Auburn, man, it's just like, they just go out and they just get it done. And sometimes they're playing so free and loose, and you're like, what are they doing? But man, they get stops when they need to. They make big shots when they need to. Obviously, Bruin's saying he's healthy, he's good to go. But I think Florida has got too much, and I just think it's Florida versus Houston for the championship.
I think Florida's the most. Even though I think Duke's the best team, I think Florida is the most complete team in the tournament, just in terms of everything they have. I mean, they have 4 guards and 4 bigs that are just all studs. That's just not fair. It's just not. With Condon, and then you bring Handlogden back, Hauk. You can bring Aberdeen off the bench. He's spectacular as well. Elijah Martin has the Final Four experience of FAU, and that really, I think, helped him in that UConn game when Florida was really tight. Yeah, he was phenomenal. But then you look at Auburn also. Like I went to the Sweet 16 games in Atlanta, the South Regional, so I saw Auburn and Michigan. And for the first 38 minutes or so, or not 38, 28 minutes or so of that game, Auburn looked pretty pedestrian, kind of like the team that we saw the last month of the season, not the team that was 27-2 and won the SEC outright and all that stuff. but they just flipped a switch, man. And went to Hod Pettiford. I think his Broom was spectacular that whole game, and he's been awesome. And obviously, you need him healthy to have big games to play well. But to me, it's all about Hod Pettiford and Denver Jones. When those two guys start hitting shots, you can see the energy just feed off of everyone else,
Mhm.
and they just get rolling, man. I mean, Michigan had no answers for them, for that athleticism, for the quickness. They could get to their spots whenever they wanted. And some of the shots Bedford hit as well was just like, holy crap, man.
That's
That's
been all
just
year.
nuts.
That's
Yeah,
been all
it's
year
been
for him.
all year for them. So for me, if they could get those two guards and Chad Baker Massaro, who hasn't shot the ball well throughout this tournament, if those three guys are going, I think Florida's winning the game. But you can absolutely write a script here where you say, okay, Auburn's guards are playing well. Florida's not on their A game defensively. It's not a shock at all to where you could see Auburn winning this game either. But I'm with you. I'm taking Florida. I think I just Walter Clayton, man, and I trust their depth as much as anyone.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. I just think that the how just showed to everybody how good he is, and I think he's just. But you mentioned that they're 8 strong,
Yeah.
and I think they play in a way. You talk about what Golden done. You talk about an NBA-esque type of system and so on, and the movement and what they're doing. And then you have a guy that you just put the ball in his hands, and then Walter Clayton's just going to make the right play. And he's hitting fall away threes with two guys in his face, and people are comparing it to Steph Curry. He's on that kind of run, and I don't see that changing. Because the thing is, if he's not even making shots, you have so many other guys that can just pick up the slack.
Yeah, one other thing I'm interested in, I think if I'm Florida, I'm putting Janai Broom in as many ball screens as you possibly can because we saw Michigan State, and this is a good job by Bruce Pearl and Auburn to kind of manipulate a little bit to where Cardwell was the guy in the ball screens a lot,
Mm-hmm.
especially in that second half. But Cardwell is so good, a lot like Malak. I think he might even be better than Malak, depending on the perimeter of just staying in front of guards, keeping guys out of the lane. And I thought in that Michigan State game, that was the big key because Auburn obviously had the 17-0 kill shot at the start. Michigan State just didn't have the shot making to really overcome that. But keeping Michigan State's guards out of the lane, being able to stay in front of them. Now, Florida's guards are quicker and better than Michigan State's guards, but Jace Richardson, Jeremy Fears, Trey Holloman, that's still a pretty damn good backcourt
Oh
as
yeah.
well. But I was so impressed about how Ned Cardwell was able to stay in front of guys, force them into tougher shots, keep them away from the rim. That was incredibly impressive, and how Florida's able to manipulate. I think the fact they have a lot more shooting in the front court, and that you can't because like you can ignore Carson Cooper or even though Jackson Kohler hit a couple threes, like you live with that if you're Auburn. And Zapala, the Michigan State bigs, they're not threats from the outside, whereas Florida has guys to where they're going to try to pull Cardwell away from the basket more, which again, he's capable of that, but that opens up the driving lanes. It opens up the rim a lot more than what Michigan State was able to do because, man,
Yeah.
Cardwell was a beast defensively in that
Oh, he
game.
sure was. But that's what Florida does. They bring their bigs. Their bigs they play through their bigs. But when you don't have guys up and you have them where they have to be not concerned with the ball pressure and they're able to survey the floor at their length, with their size and be able to see back cuts and be able to see those type of things, that's a weapon. So, yeah, that's going to be part of the plan, but that's what Florida does. They're going to expect to bring guys away from the basket because you can't just sit and drop and just zone out and play in the middle because what that does, Florida does. Watch this, what Florida does. They're as good as anybody at rescreening as well. So if
Yeah.
they're coming off some actions, there's another angle of a screen if bigs aren't showing. So that's a way to compromise Auburn defensively. And I just think they can just do a few more things offensively than Auburn can. Because, like you said, if Auburn isn't making those shots at times, yeah, they can play through Bruin and they run a flex action and they run some four round one to get them touches. And look, you have guys that could just absolutely just make shots. But I think Florida is just a little more efficient and can get better shots than
I think that's
Auburn
a more
does.
diverse team than Auburn.
Yeah, agreed.
Yeah.
Agreed.
How much does the Todd Golden Bruce Pearl thing? How much does it matter? How much does that angle of obviously for those who don't know, Todd Golden was on Bruce Pearl's staff at Auburn, a little bit the mentor mentee thing. You're one obviously you had that experience in the Elite Eight with Rick Pitino and Billy Donovan going against each other in that game in 2012. How much that angle matter and how do the two coaches try to prepare for it when they know each other so well?
Well, I thought maybe you were going to mention that they both enjoy the Passover dinner together or
Yeah.
something like that. So
Hey, this is an incredible moment for those who know I am Jewish. Yeah, John Shire, Todd Golden, Bruce Pearl, three tribe members in the Final Four coaching, and then Houston, Emmanuel Sharp is an Israeli native.
there you go.
This is our year, damn it.
Look, there's nothing bad, Jack, as far as being on the staff and having some insight. That stuff is kind of overplayed a little bit. Yeah, you get a feel, but everybody pretty much knows when you're dissecting film, and everybody look. This business is incestuous as it is. Everybody knows each other. Everybody has a connection somewhere. So I don't think it plays too much into it.
Fair enough, fair enough. So you got Florida, Houston, I got Florida and Duke, and we both have Florida winning the title. What does that look like, whether it's Houston or Duke, on that title game Monday night?
Uh, I just wow. I think Houston again. They have the physicality, and you saw what Connecticut did to Florida.
And
They were just
Houston
kind
is
of
way more physical than Connecticut.
no doubt, no doubt,
And
and
Texas Tech as well, very physical team.
yeah, yeah, and you saw that. That's where they struggle. They struggle where things aren't as easy, free flowing as they want. They're very fluid, and I hate the term finesse and all that kind of stuff because Florida's not that. But they're free flowing. They don't want to change their angles. They don't want to change their cuts. And Houston does a really good job, as Duke does, of defending without fouling and not using their hands, but getting in and blowing plays up and dodging defeating screens. So yeah, I think it's going to be. And I said this. I said I could see Houston winning it. I just think Walter Clayton's going to make a play at the end. It's going to be a 1 or 2 point game. Houston might have a lead, and here comes Walter Clayton doing one of his things and knocking down a big shot. So I think it just comes down to
Yeah.
that.
What's your only chance to beat Houston? You got to hit tough shots. And
That's
Walter Clayton's the best tough shot maker in the tournament. If it is Duke, the thing that would worry me, you look back to the Maryland game, which Florida won pretty easily. They pulled away in that second half. But Derek Queen, especially early on in the game, had so much success against Florida's bigs, just kind of being quicker than him, being able to pull them out onto the perimeter, being able to kind of get by them on that end, use his size, length, athleticism to really kind of frustrate them. And he was kind of a better version of Derek Queen. And Derek Queen's an absolute beast in its own right, but Cooper Flagg playing the same exact position, trying to who a lot of those things come even a lot more natural to him than what Queen
yeah.
does. So I think that would be a big matchup issue for Florida and their bigs is
Yeah, and I saw
yeah,
that you saw that with Florida. They weren't doubling Williams late in the Texas
yeah.
Tech game, and with Toppin as well. They were just saying, okay, they're going to make them do their thing, but they're not going to double and compromise and give up the three and put their guards in position. So that's kind of been their MO. So I don't think it's going to be a situation where Bruin isn't scoring. And the same thing if it's Duke versus Florida. I think Cooper Flagg will be doing some things, but it's just, all right, now you have some other things to worry about as well.
I would say the thing that surprised me so much with the first Auburn Florida game, which I don't know how much there is to really take away from that. Obviously, Florida won at Auburn by a lot. They kicked their butts, which would to be completely honest. But I think the big trap Auburn fell into kind of with that was they played through Janai Broom in the post pretty much exclusively. And they went to straight post ups, not a lot of movement. And Janai Broom, great post player, don't get me wrong, but where he's at his best is when he's getting into that flex cut, when he's on the move as setting screens, not just straight, let's walk the ball down the court and throw it to him on the low block. I think Auburn's going to need to avoid falling into that trap again of, okay, we got to get Broom moved in to different spots here. But looking at a potential national title game, if Florida's able to get by Auburn, I do think on the flip side of it, where I think they may struggle with Flagg, I like Florida's backcourt more than Duke's. And Sion James has been incredible. Tyrese Proctor, the positional size on Duke is so good. But again, Florida can go 5 out. They can break it. Any of those guards can break you down off the dribble. And they're just so tough to defend. And they can beat you in so many different ways on the offensive end to where even with as good and as elite Duke is on the defensive end, I trust Clayton, Martin, Richard, Aberdeen to be able to find ways to create their own shot.
Yeah, those four you mentioned, it's not the same. You're not going to overpower him. A Sion, if it is Duke, it's not Sion James or Proctor. Wow, we haven't seen this length. You're matching it,
Yeah.
and I would even go to the point where you have a Clayton and a Elijah Martin. Like, to me, he has been phenomenal during the last few games. I think he is that experience, but his body. I
He
mean,
is
he's
built
just
like a man.
man. They talked about how good a football player he is. Like,
Yeah.
and he's shooting the ball well, but he's getting downhill, and he's a force to reckon with defensively.
He is. He is. He's the guy that I'd expect. Just trying to think of matchups of how that would work. Because Hauk is definitely going to guard either Flag or Knipple, I would think. But I don't think he's big enough to guard Flag. But if he ends up on Flag, and obviously these changes with subs and all that stuff, you're not playing every guy 40 minutes a game. But I would expect Martin to definitely take large stretches of time on Knipple and try to use that
Yeah,
physicality.
no doubt, no
Yeah.
doubt.
So, going to be an absolutely spectacular weekend in San Antonio. I'm jealous I didn't find a way to get down there. Of course, I'm not really surprised I don't have a place to stay in San Antonio or the budget to be able to do that. But still, man, that would be
Yeah,
an
you
all
gotta
timer.
you gotta make your reservations like 7 years in
Yeah,
advance. And I've been to about 8 Final Fours, and it's a blast. But you know what? It's exhausting, and I just like to be uh, by myself or with some friends watching the game and in the comforts of a nice sports bar, or even the comforts of my own home, and just really being able to fast forward and rewind the game and watch little things. I'm a basketball junkie when it comes to that, Jack. So I'm kind of looking forward to all this.
I love it. I love it. Going to be four best teams, can't ask for anything more than that. And I think it's going to be an absolutely spectacular Final Four, no matter who ends up winning, because, like we said, all four teams legitimately have shots here to win this whole thing. And that's what makes it beautiful. Coach, always appreciate the time, man. Going to be awesome to watch the games this weekend. We'll obviously be talking Louisville all offseason as well, but we had to talk about the games. Like, this is gonna be awesome, and that's what we enjoy. We're not gonna be able to talk about games for the next 7 months after this weekend, which stinks, but a lot of excitement for sure around the Louisville program. So we'll have that going on as well. For Coach Lieberman, I'm Jack Grossman. This has been Floyd Streets